Welcome to the Filmlings podcast.
A bi-weekly podcast where we analyze all that goes into effective filmmaking.
I'm Jonathan.
And I'm Alex.
And this is episode 122, Subtle Satyajit.
Yeah, just so different, which is one of the fascinating things about him. He is a filmmaker from India, if the name didn't clue you in. And he is so very different from the Bollywood movies that we've covered on the podcast before.
The mainstream, if you will.
Yeah, very, very different. And I don't know if he's entirely alone in this, but he is kind of unique in the amount of fame that he's garnered for his work out of India. He's maybe the only well-known filmmaker out of India who doesn't do Bollywood-style productions.
Yeah, so just a little bit of a background on Satyajit Ray, which is who we're talking about, and I'm fairly certain that's how you say it. I'm sorry if it's not, but that's what we're sticking with for today. He was born in Calcutta in 1921. He studied economics at Presidency College in Calcutta, but was always kind of inclined towards the fine arts. He also studied in Sentiniketan, where he got an appreciation for Indian art. And then in the 40s, he worked various jobs for ad agencies and publishing companies and stuff like that until 1947, when he started the Calcutta Film Society with a couple other people. And he was there. They were screening foreign films. And so he was able to watch a lot of films, specifically like American film, but also French and Italian films. And he was not only just watching them for entertainment, but he started studying these films and really like diving deep into them.
And gosh, does it show?
Yeah. And he would also learn about American films from the GIs that were stationed in Calcutta at the time. So he kind of like got heavily immersed in this world. And then eventually in 1949, he actually met Jean Renoir, who was filming in Calcutta, a film called The River, I think. And he told him about his idea to adapt a classic Indian novel called Pather Panchali, and Renoir encouraged him to do this. He said it sounded like a great idea, and that eventually did become Ray's first feature film, which is still regarded as one of his best films. It's one of the ones we're going to cover today. Ray also cites The Bicycle Thieves as a huge influence on his decision to become a filmmaker. He says as soon as he left the theater, he decided he wanted to make movies. And then towards the end of his career, he received an honorary Academy Award in 1992. He's actually the only Indian filmmaker so far to win this award. And sadly, he also passed away in 1992. But his son, Sandeep Ray, is also now a director. So the legacy lives on.
Do you know if he makes movies closer to his father's style, or?
From what I can tell, no. His latest film from 2019 is called Professor Shanku O El Dorado, and it looks like a
immediately sounds pretty zany
B movie. Yeah, it's got like a hand holding up a green vial with a guy's face in it. So I don't know if it's
wow, I didn't know about that, but that actually sounds like something I really want to watch. I want to watch a sci-fi B movie that came out of India.
It doesn't sound like very much like Satyajit Ray's films, but also Satyajit Ray said that his son was one of the best assistants he ever had. So obviously he brought him up in the film industry, and he has continued on even to this day. I mean, that last film that he made came out in 2019, so he's still going.
Dang. Dude, one of the most interesting things I found this week was looking up at some point I was looking up the summaries of these movies online on Wikipedia, and some of them are just really weird to read. It's just like it's almost like a fanboy of the movie is just like screaming the plot at you and trying to convince you to watch it.
Like people have to defend these films or else no one's going to watch them.
Well, I mean, I don't even know if that's true. It's just somebody's just so excited to tell you all about this movie. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's get excited and let's talk about the movies that we are talking about today. So, as I already said, we're starting off with Pather Panchali from 1955, which is based on the novel of the same name. It's the first in a trilogy that Satyajit Ray ended up making, including Aparajito and Apu Sansar. That's altogether known as the Apu trilogy, and we'll kind of touch on that in a general way when we talk about Pather Panchali. What else are we talking about, Alex?
Well, also today on the podcast, we're going to talk about Charulata from 1964, which is based on the novella translated as The Broken Nest, which is also the English name of the feature film if you look that up on various sites.
But the Indian name of the novella is different than Charulata, so...
Yes, it is. Yeah, oftentimes the English name of a movie won't actually be a direct translation. It'll be something that they decide works better in the language they're nativizing it to. Yeah. So they decided to go back to the short film name or the novella name, which is the short film books.
It's still appropriate for the story. So
yes, yeah, oh yeah, 100%.
Yeah, and then we'll be wrapping up with Nayak or the hero. Sometimes the title is broken up. Sometimes it's combined. But anyway, that film is from 1966, and it's Rai's second original screenplay, so he wrote this one entirely. But it is kind of loosely based on the life and career of the lead actor named Uttam Kumar, and we'll talk about that. It's got a lot of meta elements to it, so that'll make more sense when we get to Nayak at the end.
It's also like his first or second, I think The Big City, which is another film he's done, was his first that was set in contemporary times. Up until that point, for like 10 years straight, he only made period pieces.
Yeah. And to varying degrees, because I feel like Charulata is a very different period than the Apu movies.
It is. I think there are timestamps at some point in the Apu trilogy.
In Aparajito, it said 1920 something. I remember that.
Yeah.
But Charulata is definitely earlier than that.
Yes, definitely. It feels like the 1800s to me.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm wrong. I'm not 100% accurate.
They did have stuff like their printing presses and stuff like that.
Yeah, but also they were working with printing presses.
Yeah, well, yeah, there you go. All right, so let's get into these movies individually. And Jason, set up Pather Panchali for us.
Pather Panchali from 1955. In rural Bengal in the 1910s, the Roy family is scrapping by. The father scrapes out money as a priest, but wants to become a poet and playwright. The mother struggles to raise her daughter, Durga, and her son, Apu, while also taking care of her elderly cousin, Indir. The daughter, Durga, steals fruit from an elderly neighbor's orchard and helps care for Apu. It's not an easy life, and the pressures of money, disease, and fate soon reveal the humanity found in facing crisis as a family.
All right, Jonathan. So this is a very different movie than anything else we've seen out of India. And it feels... my immediate first impression and the thing that screams out itself to me is that this is like the Satyajit Ray's version of incarnation of like the 400 Blows, but in India.
I was thinking more like Bicycle Thieves. But
that's fair.
Yeah, I mean, along those same lines. It's European New Wave, and it's like, hey, I want to make that kind of thing too, and this is that.
Yeah. It's very much that. And that's how, I'm sure this has come across before, but that's how people find their style and how you develop your technique is just by copying things you like and then your own style will just develop, like it'll just happen.
Yeah.
As you essentially embark on refining your technique through mimicry. But that even that description, which is a normal process for all artists to go through, seems to do disservice to this film because this film is really good.
Oh yeah, it doesn't feel like a little brother to any of those other films we're talking about. Like this one stands tall on its own. You
can feel it becoming its own thing over the course of the movie. Like you can almost see Rai's technique develop over the course of the film.
Yeah.
Not
What
to
I
say like
love
the better
about
is
the
in or anything that, but your first impression is, oh, this is kind of like a new wave European movie.
Yeah.
But then you start to notice the beats that are very clearly Ray.
And I will say that both 400 Blows and Bicycle Thieves have much more of a I don't want to say like a bitterness to them, but like a more on the negative connotation. But this film,
Yeah.
although it has a lot of sadness, it comes away much more hopeful and almost uplifting. Although it's not like a happy movie. But you know what I'm saying? Like compared to those other films, like this one does not feel so pessimistic.
No, it definitely has like a gleam of hope in it, even though in this movie and throughout almost the entire Apu trilogy, just people freaking drop like flies around Apu.
And it's always it's always pneumonia. Come in from the cold. Don't be out there. Come on.
No, there's a lot of death. I thought it was interesting because when I went to watch this movie the first time, I knew it as the Apu trilogy. Although from your description, Jonathan, it doesn't sound like that was the original intent to do the full trilogy. And I know it's based off of a book, but it doesn't feel like it's not about. This movie isn't really about Apu. Like Apu's in it. Like he's born like partway through the movie. And then he's a baby for like the rest of the movie.
Yeah.
It's more about like the three women who kind of impact and influence his life up to that point. Two of whom die.
I would say in a very kind of implicatory way, it's mostly about the father, and yet it's told from the point of view of everyone affected by the father's actions. Does that make sense?
This is true. I actually got more of an impression that it was from the mother's point of view. She seemed to be making a lot of the decisions in the movie.
Yeah, I just kind of feel like
on when the father was just like gone.
I know, but that's the thing is I felt that I was getting the idea that it's like a parable, and it's the parable of the man who goes out and he knows that his family needs such and such. But as he's going out, he just needs like a little bit more, and it takes a little bit more time. But eventually, he can't get that time back. And so if you tell that kind of parable from his end, I can see it from his end, but we're getting all of the story through the repercussions of that. What happens to the people who are left behind when you're doing that kind of search for your fortune kind of a thing. And then you come back and it's too late. And then, he has like his immediate, oh crap, I screwed up moment.
Yeah, that's fair. I feel like it definitely transitions that way by the end of the film. And when actually, not to, go out of bounds too much, but when you get to the second movie, it definitely starts off feeling like the father's movie.
Yeah. And eventually it becomes, eventually the whole trilogy becomes kind of a cyclical thing where it's
a cycle of father to son.
Yeah, and then a hopeful note of breaking that cycle eventually, but it was a long road to get there. But yeah, that kind of kicks off this whole thing of this almost like, I don't want to call it negligence because it's not like he doesn't love his family, but it's just he kind of takes his own needs. He acts on his own needs more than the families, and that becomes the thing that we see repeated throughout all three films.
Yeah, it is. There is definitely a tone of like accepting responsibility almost over the course of the movie.
That's a good word because that is very prevalent.
Yeah, and it's definitely he does a very good job with that in the themes, where you kind of set up, I don't know, I guess the moralistic rules of your world, where anybody who rejects responsibility is punished and anybody who accepts responsibility is rewarded. But most characters tend not to want to accept responsibility. It's almost like the same thing that you see in the code where like the moral rules were literally codified in Hollywood, where, if somebody is a gangster on screen, they have to be punished by the end of the movie, either through death, typically death, or being jailed. And you can do that. You do that. You actually do something like that in almost every story you tell when you decide what the moral repercussions for certain actions are going to be, which is based off of your theming and what kind of story you want to tell with your characters.
Yeah. And I think there are a couple more layers of subtlety than that in a couple of these characters. Like, for example, I think that the other townspeople kind of they're not very prevalent. A lot of this is stuff that kind of isn't the most prevalent, because throughout most of the film, we're just watching the mother trying to deal with, keeping her kids in line by herself, also keeping them safe and healthy, and all of that. But on the sidelines, we have the dad who's gone off to try and, essentially he has a noble goal, which is to get enough money to build up their house and, give them nicer things and all that kind of thing. And that's one of the things that I love about this movie, is that nobody's motives are unsympathetic entirely. There's no like mustache twirling villains. But then there's also the other villagers who have kind of a disdain for them because they are, it seems like, the poorest family in the community.
There's that one woman who just drives me nuts.
Yeah. And granted, the daughter was stealing her fruit. Okay, that's a bad thing. We understand. But she also has zero sympathy for their plight of having absolutely nothing, and the fact that the dad has to, leave and travel for such a long time in order to get them any kind of money to pay their debts and fix their house and that kind of thing. But then the neighbors just kind of stand by as the daughter just kind of wastes away. And so there's all this, and I mean, the neighbors kind of come to their senses after the daughter dies. That's kind of what everything kind of happens after she dies. Spoilers. But we have to talk about that, because it's a huge point of the film. But at that point, everyone kind of realizes, oh crap, we should have been better neighbors. Oh crap, maybe I could have just got enough to fix the roof and then come back and still had that time with her or whatever. So there are a lot of kind of layers to it as we're going, rather than just like he was negligent, so he got
selfishness
punished.
is often punished in this movie and movie series. I guess Pather Panchali is kind of serving as a stand-in for the whole series in a way.
Because as a cyclical series, it kind of encapsulates a lot of the series that keep on going. As a whole, yeah. Because just to spell some of that out a little bit more, the second film, Aparajito, in that film, his family has moved away after the daughter dies, and so they go to. I think they literally do what the mother suggests in the first movie. Which is move away, but he was like, "It's our ancestral home." Blah blah blah.
Let's move away. Let's go to the river. You can be one of those singing priest people and make some money.
Yeah. And so he does that, and then he literally works himself to death because he gets sick, and then he forces himself to go to work, and that eventually takes his toll on him. And so then the dad has died, and then the mom is raising Apu, and he grows up and decides. Well, first of all, he has to work, so he kind of has to grow up a little bit too fast, kind of a thing, because he's watching all the other boys play and go to school, and he's missing out on that because he has to work as a priest now to make money for his mom. And then he eventually convinces her to let him go to school, and he gets educated. And we're going to see this again in Charulata, is that Rai has like a really big emphasis on education and the arts and writing and stuff like that, because in the third film, Apu becomes a writer and has all kinds of angsty issues with that.
Yeah, he's definitely an autodidact, hardcore.
I think their last name in the film is actually Rai, so that was interesting. But yeah, so then the mom is raising him, and then he gets so busy with school, and Aparajito is more or less like Tokyo Story, where he's so busy he doesn't have time to write to his mom, and then his mom dies in the village because she's too stubborn to tell him that she's actually sick. So there's a little bit of that going on. But then he's left with nothing in Apu Sansar, or the world of Apu. He gets roped into a wedding. I won't even go into that. He gets married. It ends out.
No, that was really weird. It was 100%.
I still can't tell if that was a setup or not.
It was, you know what? It was 100% the kind of thing that you see in like classic literature. Like that was the kind of BS you would see in like a Russian
it
book.
had parallels to Hindi mythology because they do make some
It also feels very
connections to
where
Apu.
people get tricked into getting married constantly.
Yeah, because they made a couple connections to Apu looking like Vishnu, and then they go see a movie with the gods in it and stuff like that. So I feel like if I was more versed in Hindi mythology, that might mean more. But it was just kind of a rom-com-y situation that happened there. But he gets married. It turns out great. He's got a great wife. She dies in childbirth. And so then he resents his son and decides he's going to go live a great life somewhere else while his wife's family takes care of the kid, and then eventually shows up when the kid is 5. So that's the overview of the Apu trilogy, so that you're kind of caught up as we go through the rest of this. So yeah, I mean, I would say that the style that is set up in Pather Panchali, although the subject matter of Rai's films vary greatly. Like the style is fairly consistent, starting with Pather Panchali. He's all, and I don't know the exact history of like film technology in India between 1955 and 1966, but I assume at some point. Are you trying
to tell me you don't have that memorized?
Sorry, I don't. I barely have it memorized for America. I'm like, what year did sound come in again? What year did color come in again? But that the black and white feel that I mean everything feels like those early French and Italian New Wave for a lot of Rai's work. And I don't know that there are any that varied from that. Alex, you've seen more than I have, so you can maybe shed a little bit more light.
No, they kind of all fit that frame.
But we're seeing a lot of that getting started here in Pather Panchali, and it works. So, I mean, I guess Satyajit is just a, if it's not broke, don't fix it kind of guy, which, I mean, I love the style, so it didn't bother me.
It kind of makes sense, though, if you think about it from the viewpoint of him making this stuff in a world where he's the only one of his peers who's really working in this style.
I think a lot of his work is kind of like a like thumbing the nose at
refutation.
Yeah, it's a hey, look, Indian film doesn't have to be that. Look what else it can be, and it can still be great and meaningful.
Which one of the things I like about this kind of new wave style is that it makes it really good for incorporating. It does a really good job of kind of getting down to the nitty gritty of what makes individual cultures and societies kind of tick. Like when you get into the new wave for like American cinema or Italian cinema or French cinema, there's something about them that becomes way more quintessentially French than their big budget blockbuster productions. Yeah. There's an argument that could be made in America that anything that's big budget in America just feels inherently American. But for other countries, it makes more sense that anything that is that stuff that's way more individualistic or down on like the kind of like neorealistic level kind of reflects that idea a bit better. I almost feel like I kind of understood more about like, I guess, how Indian artists perceive their own culture through this movie better than I have from Bollywood movies, which I do get. Like there is undeniably part of Indian culture that is baked into Bollywood movies, but much like when you talk about American,
like a big celebration.
But much like when you talk about American movies, it's a love of stuff that's big and glowing and fancy, and you like a lot of singing. And there's definitely an incorporation of music in Satyajit Ray's movies, especially like The Music Room, but it also isn't like singing everything where people are just having conversations through song because that's what's entertaining.
It's almost all diegetic. Like if there's music, someone's playing the music.
Yeah. It's all incorporated. Like the world feels pieced together in a way.
Although there are scored moments, but it's not musical numbers, if you will.
Do we want to move on to Charulata?
Yeah, let's do it. Jason, set it up for us.
Charulata from 1964. Charu is the intelligent and beautiful wife of a successful newspaperman. Her husband, though, spends far more time with his paper than with Charu. who's starving for affection and companionship. But when the husband's young, handsome, artistic cousin arrives, and the husband asks that cousin to be a friend to Charu, well, it's only a matter of time before forbidden feelings form.
Okay, Alex, this is a very different kind of film, and yet it is approached with the same sensibilities as Pather Panchali, if that makes sense, but it's like very much more melodrama.
Yeah, very melodrama-y.
But I loved it because, I mean, the way that the drama is portrayed is really entertaining, and it's also very like slow burn.
Yeah, no, it boils for a lot. It devotes a lot of time to building tension, if that makes sense. Because I mean, which makes sense. It's all about kind of this forbidden love type angle.
Kind of, but there's also a negligence angle on that as well.
This is also true.
Because we have like an unintentional Citizen Kane story happening, and then we have the other like oh gosh, I can't think of a good parallel, which is probably a good thing. But yeah, we have the wife Charulata on the other side, who's fallen in love with this sensitive writer who shares all her interests, that her husband has invited into their home because he's been so busy working. Not that he doesn't care about her, but although there are literally like lines where he's like, "This printing press is competition for my wife, blah, 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 blah. I love it so much."
Yeah, it's a little on the nose. It was like, yeah, we know. We got it.
Yeah. But the thing is that it goes through all of the beats that make you think, are they gonna, have this fling? Is this going to happen? Will they, won't they, kind of a deal? And it never shows you anything. It just lets you figure it out. Yeah. No, it's very much is kind of like the appeal of this movie, to a certain extent, kind of appeals to that part of humanity that likes to look at scandal and likes to gawk at stuff that is like gossipy kind of thing. I also got a little bit of from the very beginning, and this is not like a continuous type of thing, but there's a little bit of a Rear Window kind of a deal, but it almost turns the audience into the Jimmy Stewart character, where we're just like peering into this house and trying to figure out, what's going on with all these people in here, but it starts off with this voyeuristic kind of thing of Charulata in her room looking through her binoculars at all the people on the street, and just kind of, it never really says it, but you can just kind of imagine that she's trying to figure out who are all these people, what is going on in their lives while I'm cooped up in here. I think there's actually a caged bird in the house too that they cut away to sometimes, which is nice little symbolism.
Yeah, it is. One of the things I really enjoy about the film, at least from a character building perspective, is that essentially this guy who comes in is kind of just her husband all over again, but willing to pay attention to her.
And that is why she's so ticked off when he gets his flipping paper published.
Yeah, he is essentially the younger version of her husband, the version of her husband that presumably she was in love with at some point in time, and who actively, not just passively, loved her back.
Yeah,
and
idealistic.
Then the second he evolves, that's another destruction of another chance for romantic happiness for her.
Well, yeah, it's as soon as the work starts to take any kind of precedence to her, because that's the whole thing, is that her husband is putting his work ahead of her, and then the new guy, he's writing for himself, and she like gives him this ultimatum, like, you can never publish what you write in this journal that I'm giving to you. Like, this is me. I made it for you. And then he does it, and she feels betrayed. I mean, there's the underlying like betrayal that's happening here on her part anyway, but we're just going to gloss over that for now. But she feels betrayed because he got the work published. And so then she lashes back out by getting her work published. And so it's like, it's such like, oh my gosh, it's such a highbrow kind of a warfare that's happening, but it's just really, it's also really interesting to watch. I don't know how to put it.
No, it's a fascinating look. It definitely is a character drama. Like it kind of appeals based off of the idea of getting to see what these characters will do, how they'll develop, and it faces them with a series of very interesting choices that are definitely have some very high consequences, which is a good recipe for any story.
Yeah.
And I enjoy it. But one of the things I like about those choices is that they feel really real. Like, even though this is a period piece, it doesn't feel super grand or over the top or blockbustery, and it kind of feels down to earth. Like, it feels like this is something that could happen any given day.
It's a really contained story too. It almost all happens in their house. Granted, the house is like, you know, a mansion or a castle or whatever, and then maybe at the printing press a little bit. But it all is very contained. It's just what happens when you mix all these people together, and this one's not paying attention to this one's paying too much attention to this one, yada, yada, yada. But yeah, I think one of the most interesting layers of the whole thing is the ways in which the husband's storyline depart from Citizen Kane, although they both have this element of, like, he's super obsessed with making this newspaper work and be great, but he still loves his wife. He's just putting in too much work into his work and neglecting her. And so that's why towards the very end, he feels so betrayed. Like, if he knew or realized how little attention he was giving to his wife, he probably wouldn't have been so affected. But the ultimate action ends up being an indictment of himself as much as her.
Yeah. No, he does not come away looking good in this. Even though he is essentially cuckolded over the course of the movie. Like, you also get the sense that he made his bed and now he's got to sleep in it alone.
Well, yeah. I mean, there's also a very open-ended aspect to it that has an element of reconciliation to it, which I thought was really interesting, but it's literally the last frame, and so you don't get to dive into that.
Yeah, no, that's fair.
So we've pretty much said everything, but we're being, like, very vague about it just because it is so implied. Like, everything is through subtle? Like looks and actions, like the title? And subtlety. Like the title. It's all very subtle.
Like the title, Jonathan?
But that's also something that is very different from other Indian films that we've watched. Watch or go listen back to any of our other Indian film episodes. Even Mughal-e Azam. Do you remember the very first Indian film we watched for the podcast?
Azam. Yep.
That film came out in 1960s. That was 4 years before this one. And that one was also, like, huge melodrama. I mean, that was like historical war epic. But there's even this subtlety that is not in any other Indian films that we've watched. Every time we watch one of these films that comes out of the mainstream of India, we talk about how it's like filmmaking in bold or all caps. And it's like everything is pushed to the top. And this is like the opposite. It's like everything is under the surface. Everything is implied. Like, all these plot points that we're talking about happen, but they happen off screen, basically. And we see, like, all the in-between moments.
Yeah. It's ellipsis.
Yeah, it is. It's very Ozu. And I haven't seen any, like, direct connection, but I imagine Ozu is also on that list of filmmakers.
It's within the same, like, they're literally working at the same time through the 50s and the 60s. Yeah. So yeah, no, there's no, I would be very surprised if he hadn't seen Ozu and wasn't influenced by him. And by some other famous neo-realistic movies. We would call this the new Indian cinema, but it's like one dude.
Yeah, I know. If there were anyone else doing this kind of thing,
I think you need a minimum of 2, probably 3 for it to really be called a movement. Yeah. Maybe? I don't know how these things work.
It needs to be like, you need to see an evolution of it at least. Like, if there was, after Satyajit Ray, then there's more filmmakers that aren't maybe doing the exact same kind of thing, but it's like, it feels like it's coming out of that tradition, but it feels like Indian film / Bollywood, like mainstream, was just like big and loud, which is great. I love a lot of those films, but it did that. And then there's Satyajit Ray in there, and it just kind of like passed him by and kept going, doing its own thing.
Yeah. He didn't really have much of an impact on the overall trajectory of Indian cinema as a whole, which is kind of a bummer.
But not to say he hasn't had any impact, because obviously, film buffs like us and Criterion.
He's real big on like stuff like Criterion.
He is up there in those list of filmmakers to study. If you're interested in these types of really like personal human dramas. So yeah, and Charulata is that. It's just got a lot more kind of flair to it, just because the costumes are bigger, the sets are a little bigger and more ornate. It's very high class, so there's a lot of like decadence to it, which is also a contrast from Pather Panchali and the whole Apu trilogy, which deals with a much kind of lower class of people, much less affluent types of people. So that was a really interesting contrast as well. And obviously their problems are a lot more dramatized, if you will.
Yeah.
But I do, before we move off, I will just ask Alex, what was your interpretation of the very, very end of Charulata, which ends on a freeze frame of the husband coming back to the house and reaching for the hand of his wife after he's stormed out? He's realized what's happened. He's been betrayed, literally betrayed by everybody. He's been robbed, and he's been, his wife has been unfaithful. And he goes out on this long carriage ride in the rain and like vents all his emotions to himself. And then he comes back and we end on a freeze frame. What were your thoughts on that?
I mean, it's a good freeze frame because it's a moment of reckoning for him. Like that's when, the bird has come home to roost, if you will, in that broken nest.
To the broken nest, yeah.
But yeah, I mean, if it was, I don't know. Part of me wants to say that she leaves him, but I just don't know if that's really a thing. Like I haven't in Indian cinema, like I haven't seen it in any Indian movie. I haven't seen any divorce in any Indian movie, and that's what I have to go off of. So right. I'm guessing not that. There is a possibility for
it could have
suicide.
Been one of those ham-fisted things like what did we watch? Merrily We Go to Hell, where they just like threw on a Hollywood ending.
They tacked on a happy ending?
I don't know, because I feel like it...
So from a narrative standpoint, that is the point where you have to end. Or you could technically have ended it earlier, but you can't go any farther than that, because if they say another word to each other, then the story isn't over and you have to go for like another act. But you've concluded the story of what has happened. That is the moment when he realizes how broken everything is. And I also think it's the moment where he realizes how little anything there can heal. But I don't have enough information, I guess, from a cultural standpoint to really say what would happen going forward.
Yeah. I'm just wondering if it is kind of supposed to just put it in your mind that he realizes that he was at fault in this as much as she was. And so, there's a possibility of them both admitting their faults and both reconciling. Because now she's been abandoned, he's been abandoned and betrayed, but they were both at fault. And yet the film ends with them coming back together and not diverging from each other. Again, I don't know, like you said, I don't know what kind of cultural, kind of like pressure there might have been to make it end that way, but I do think that it does put a little bit of an optimistic note on the whole thing. All right, but with that, let's move on to Nayak the Hero from 1966. Jason, give us the rundown.
Nayak the Hero from 1966. Famous actor Arindam Mukherjee is on his way to the capital for a prestigious award. On the train ride there, he meets a young journalist from a woman's magazine, Aditi Semgupta, who initially despises him, but soon grows empathetic as she interviews him over his past regrets.
Alex, give us the one title that we've already covered rundown.
This is just 8.5.
It's
On
pretty
a
much
train.
8.5.
It's
Yeah.
8.5 on a train, Jonathan.
Yeah. Which sounds very Hitchcockian, honestly.
I will say it does have a really well developed I guess B story for the female aspiring reporter on the train, whose like parents are pressuring her into marriage as is trying to report, which is different from 8.5, and actually kind of an interesting angle on this film, and kind of is another interesting point in Satyajit Ray's movies. He has really well developed female characters for a period of time where that was not common in a lot of movies, but his are really, really, really well developed, really good characters, lots of good arcs, and dimensionality to it. And this movie is no exception. While
the wife in Apu Sensar was a really great character.
Oh yeah, she was great. I was rooting for her the entire time, and life just kept on kicking her.
Yeah. But yeah, no, I totally agree, and I do think that the hero has more side stories going on than 8.5. 8.5 was kind of tunneled in on the main guy. But yeah, it's interesting. I mean, obviously we have another kind of bottle film where we're all stuck on a train and we've got all these different characters all interacting, but we also have the one character that is like a magnet in both senses, to where like just his presence as being such a high profile person makes every person on that train either immediately attracted to him or repelled from him. And then the ways that evolves and changes over the course of the film is really interesting.
Yeah, and you were talking about this before we started recording, Jonathan, but this is very much like 8.5. It kind of has that dreamy quality to it. Also, like a lot of other Italian neorealism and later Italian films that are kind of, I guess, post neorealism, like a lot of Antonioni. It kind of has that dreamlike quality for it that almost makes you feel like you're falling asleep while you're watching the movie.
Or that when you think back on it, it's hard to sequence everything back together because it will. And there are literal dream sequences in the film and flashbacks and stuff like that, but it's all part of that. That was part of 8.5 too, was these flashbacks that would just kind of cut in at times, and yet all the action that's happening in the normal story is, it kind of like just various conversations that could happen really at any time. And so when you think back on it, you just remember like flashes and images and scenes and stuff like that. And some of the dream sequences are really striking, so they stick out, like like the money quicksand, or the nighttime brawl that's like a flashback of the last night, but it's framed as like a filming scene. So there's lots of really interesting things like that, but the overall sense of the film is this kind of almost ethereal experience.
Yeah, it's definitely the least linear Satyajit Ray movie that I watched.
It's not really a plot as much as it is a character study.
One of the nice things about the way he set it up, because there isn't really a plot, there's just a train ride. So there is still something driving it forward over the course of the movie.
Keeps it chugging along.
Yep, keeps it moving forward. Which is
keeps
nice.
The film on rails.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, no wandering around. You know where you're going ahead of time, driving straight through. It's an interesting way to structure a movie. It's also an interesting look at the pressures of fame.
That's the main thematic thrust.
One of the more sympathetic looks at pressures of fame that I've seen here. And a fame that is still like a fame. I think he has a flop at the start of the story, but he is definitely not like a washed up actor, which is a very, very common thing we see in American cinema, like Birdman or something.
You mean as a narrative device?
But as a narrative device, yeah.
I mean, in the tabloids too, but that's a different story.
Yeah, tabloids are tabloids.
But yeah, I mean, it's the whole idea is that he portrays the hero, quote unquote, in many of these films, and I think the idea is that he's almost like a TV drama star or something like that. But he has this untouchable, we call it nowadays like plot armor. Like those are the characters that he plays. Like they always come out ahead, and that's the main issue that the reporter lady has with all of his characters, and she's the only one who really steps up and says, all your characters are terrible. They don't have any problems. They don't have any flaws. And that's kind of how he starts off the film, seeing himself as like, you know, I'm so far above this, you know, I've got it made. Everything is going right for me. And then he has to kind of deconstruct his own psyche and his own past and stuff like that, and realize his brokenness. And he ends like as a mess. And he credits it all to the reporter who just took the time to get to know him. And granted, she was originally starting off, you know, digging up dirt for her own column. And then she kind of moved beyond that too. So there's a lot of really interesting layers going on here. And I think in context of the other two films, it's really interesting because it does bring it to the modern day and a whole other type of people that we're looking at, but with those same sensibilities. Yeah,
no, that's fair. Gosh, now that I think more and more about it, I keep thinking that 8.5 just needs like a train.
I think a lot more movies need a train.
Yeah, you need a train. You need something that drives it. Even if you're going to be doing something non-linear or something that isn't really plot focused, you still need, I guess, gas in an engine. You know, You need something to move it forward.
I mean, yeah, it's one of the oldest driving forces, like back to when we covered The General. Like, it literally just gives you one direction to go, and you hit your points along the way. You hit, you know, whether that's running into different characters in the different compartments or, you know, taking the stops. But it really is kind of a metaphor for the plot development too.
Yeah, no, that's fair. Also, just life. You can't control it. It's just going forward like a train. We're all waiting for a train, Jonathan.
We are. And we all end up strangers on a train. So there you go. But yeah, what did you think about kind of the backstory elements and his old mentor who, you know, we build up this whole story from his past where he used to be a stage actor, and his mentor basically told him, you know, if you go into the movies, you're basically just going to be selling out for the money. The real heart and art of acting and performance is in the theater. And as soon as that guy dies, he goes and sells out to the movies. And then he starts having these nightmares about getting buried in cash, and his old mentor is not coming to save him, or like intentionally like watching him sink into the piles of cash.
Yeah, when his life has just gone off the rails.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's really good. It was a really good angle. It's kind of a nice story of, oh gosh, I guess the people who keep people real who become famous, and how easy it is to lose that, and just get lost so easily.
And it's also interesting because it seems like a message that fits just as well in, you know, American cinema or any other culture or society that has these like hyper praised or awarded or recognized people. Like, they all fall into the same pitfalls. Like, this is not a message for Indian people or Indian celebrities or whatever. This is a message for any kind of celebrity. But it's just put so poignantly, and like the image of him sinking into the piles of cash is like a huge slap in the face kind of a thing. But it's really interesting because it is so fantastical, much more fantastical than most of Satyajit Ray's other films.
Yes and no. Some of them take a real trip. Like, for instance, again, The Music Room is a pretty trippy movie. It too also jumps through time, but it doesn't have the same. I wouldn't say it has the same 8.5 quality feel to it. There's also, totally random, but just to point out again how he pulls from foreign styles, a couple that he's made that are like just straight up like Hitchcock movies.
I was getting a lot of Hitchcock vibes from these. Like, even though the subject matter was very different, there's just like elements of the filmmaking. Like Charulata has like a lot of really, really precise zooms and dolly movements and stuff like that. And obviously the black and white and the shadowy nature of it. So that's really interesting that you say that.
Yeah. There's a couple that are. There's one from the 90s, which is about a woman whose supposedly long lost uncle returns to her, and the
I read that summary somewhere.
The family doesn't believe that he's real or that he's really the uncle. They think that he's there to get the father's will. Or get into the father's will, which is an interesting take on things.
Wow.
That one's really good. There's another that is, we always say that directors get like one movie that's about movies, but this guy got multiple movies that were about movies. And this one's about I'm trying to remember the name of it, but it's about a writer who ends up in a small town in India after like his car breaks down, and this man takes him in, and he's just so excited that this guy's like involved in movies. And then like it was called The Coward. And then his daughter / the writer's former lover appears. And then it kind of becomes like this tangled mess. Like, oh yeah, no, it's real messy. But yeah, there you go.
So, but what you just brought up about how we often talk about directors, especially like really prominent or quote unquote like intellectual directors who end up making a film about movies or the creative process or whatever. How do you think this film stacks up against some of those other films like 8.5, like I'm trying to remember some of the other ones. I know we just recently talked about The Man Who Killed Don Quixote, which we criticized for the way that it portrayed that, but where does this one fall kind of on that scale of like really thoughtful breakdown of celebrity and film industry and that kind of thing to just like really head up your butt kind of a look at things.
So I think
Orson Welles is the other one who's done that with like F for Fake and stuff.
Yeah, one of the good things about that one and one of the good things about this one is that it doesn't involve a lot of ego. Which is strange to talk about with Orson Welles, because I think a lot of people thought he was hot shit, which is kind of true, but he was also fairly honest about who he was and his capabilities, and
and
he was, aside from his persecution complex, like his worth as a creator.
And specifically F for Fake, he was more having fun than trying to defend his own honor, if you will.
Oh yeah, no. He was
which is kind of
telling
what,
the truth through rampant lying.
Yeah, which is kind of what Don Quixote ended up being a little more. Was just more of like a defending myself as still being great.
Yeah, that's one of the problems when your meta movie also ends up being an autobiography.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's why it's interesting that Nayak is more based on the actor who Uttam Kumar, who was an Indian actor and had some anxiety and these struggles that he had that were very similar to the character, and apparently the film is loosely based on that. Like Satyajit Ray wrote the film with him in mind, and so it's interesting that. This isn't a film about Satyajit Ray in the same kind of a way that like 8.5 is kind of Fellini's movie, but it's still about filmmaking and it's about a certain amount of celebrity and that kind of thing. But it takes the spotlight off of Satyajit Ray, and it also makes it really interesting to watch Uttam Kumar's performance, because he's portraying this character that's very close to himself. And obviously, I mean, he nails it. This is one of the things that he's most well known for now. But I do think that's really interesting whenever someone is trying to perform something that like hits so close to home like that.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's a nice thing because he has perspective on it, but also, you know, his own ego isn't wrapped up in it.
Yeah. Any other specific things about the hero, Alex?
No, not really. It's a really well structured movie, even though it has such an odd structure. And that's kind of the strength of it. That's, you know, that is like its oddness is kind of what makes it unique and makes it stand out. And again, like he kind of creates like this fertile ground for his actors to work with. And this is, did we mention this is one of his original screenplays?
Yeah, this is his second original screenplay.
Yeah, this is definitely showing off that writing talent. The dialogue is really good, or at least the subtitle versions of it are. And I'm assuming the delivery is really good. I got emotions from the delivery. It's really hard to interpret sometimes across language barriers because you miss things like inflections and like cultural things. Like the Indian head wiggle always takes me a little time to get used to. It's just a common way to talk, but it can throw you off if you're not used to it.
Yeah, it's like the equivalent of, you know, Italians speaking with their hands or, you know, that kind of thing. It's just different. Yeah, no, I agree. And so as long as we're talking about this kind of the interesting aspects of watching foreign language films is that in some of like Charulata specifically and Nayak the hero, you know, the more modern, I guess you get, or modern and I don't want to say like high class, but learned, I guess is a better way to put it. The more English you get mixed in. And so that's one of the other things that kind of like throws you for a loop. I
forgot about that. But yeah, no, like each movie has more and more just like English in it. And I'm guessing, Jonathan, it's, you know, kind of like how you and I who grew up in Texas or, you know, just most parts of America nowadays, you just know some phrases in Spanish.
Yeah.
Like I could walk into a room and say, ¿Qué pasó? And you would know what I'm saying.
See.
But like, yeah, it was weird to see so much English. Yeah. And of course it makes sense, right? Like India essentially was occupied by England for so long.
Right. And that like creeps up in the stories here and there just because it can't not.
Yeah.
And like, I mean, in some of the later Apu movies where there's the Indian marching bands like playing He's a Jolly Good Fellow at the wedding was again just like a wait what?
It was a little awkward. It was like, oh, okay. Or for instance, I know it's
just a thing. Like it's part of.
Yeah, I don't think you've watched this one. You haven't watched the one with the uncle yet, right?
No.
That one, I think that one's called The Stranger. But that one has a lot of English in it. Sometimes you'll be watching and then it'll just, you won't even realize that you stopped reading subtitles because it's just been in English for like the past 2 minutes.
Yeah. And sometimes they would take out the subtitles if the phrase was just like very clear English.
Yeah. Yeah. It was so strange.
All right. But enough about the foreign language experience. Let's move on into overall, like, overall about Satyajit Ray as a director. What have we learned, Alex?
He's a unique dude. He is the international cinephile of India. I don't think
he's the poster child of cinephilia in India.
Yeah, like on the global scale.
He's the one that other foreigners kind of glom onto when they're looking to India for those same types of human drama, intellectual style films.
Even though he is so unique among Indian filmmakers, he does kind of provide like an access point to Indian language film. In a way, because he is the guy who went out and studied European and American and East Asian cinema. and kind of incorporated it into his own work. So even if you don't speak the language, oftentimes one of the things that helps you get into a foreign movie is that you understand that language of cinema, how shots are structured, what's going on, reading the emotions on a human face, which
The rhetoric that we like to talk about.
yeah, which most humans know how to do just by growing up, but not. But I feel like the act of watching more and more movies or more content helps you even refine that skill even more.
Yeah, because it's like the same as the more you come across a word that has multiple definitions, you get a fuller sense of what the word means and how it can be used. And that's the same thing that happens with film techniques. Is the more different contexts that you see the same technique in, the better understanding you have of it, and especially if you're learning how to use it, the better understanding you have of when and where it can be placed and what effect that's going to have.
Yeah, and one of the things that I love about trying to switch over to foreign language films or between different foreign language films is that while the flavors of the cinema, or I guess the dialects of the cinema might be different, they aren't so foreign to each other that you can't understand them. Or at least most of them aren't. There's some really wacky stuff out there.
Yeah.
But for the most part, you should be able to understand most cinematic language.
We're not going to get into Nollywood yet. So here's one of the things that, so I'll include a link to this in the description, but there's a clip of Satyajit Ray receiving his honorary Academy Award, and Audrey Hepburn is presenting it to him, and she kind of intros it by saying that Satyajit Ray set out to create films about those things that were unique to the Indian experience and also those which were universal, which I think is a really interesting way to put it. And it sounds like it contradicts itself, but it really makes sense when you actually watch some of these films and you understand, like, these are very specifically Indian focused stories. And this is another thing that Martin Scorsese said when he talks about the first time he ever watched Pather Panchali. He said, this was the first time I saw a film that was by Indian people for Indian people, not just about Indian people.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the things that you get when you watch a Satyajit Ray film, is like this is a very specifically Indian film. It's directed towards Indian people, and yet it humanizes everyone, because you realize how much of the same struggles we all go through, because you realize how specific that is, and yet how relatable it is all at the same time.
It is nice to see a native cinema made for a native population, because I definitely don't get the sense from Satyajit Ray's work that it's meant for, or it's appealing directly to an international audience.
Mm-hmm. Like, if we get something out of it, great, but we're not the intended audience.
Yeah, no, it's definitely an Indian movie for Indian people.
Yeah. And yet, again, that the amount of these films that is relatable, that we can get stuff out of, just speaks volumes to the way that Rai is putting these films together. I mean, that's one of the things that Akira Kurosawa talks about is if you want to make or appreciate any kind of great story, you have to study the stories of all over the world. Because the more you study the stories from all over the world, the more you realize how universal all of the stories are. Like at their core, they're about family and relationships and people and neglect and rejection and all these things that are just so common that we all feel, and yet they can still be directed at very, very specific types of people in order to hit home in different kinds of ways.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. And one of the things I loved you're right. One of the things I loved about going through the larger part of his collection of work was seeing those different aspects of Indian life, because he doesn't contain himself to like the middle class or the upper class or the lower class or even by time. In a way, he kind of worked really hard to give like a picture of a wider Indian cinema that doesn't all have the Bollywood treatment on it, on his own, which is really cool.
Yeah. Yeah, the variety of subject matter, even in the three that we covered, again, where it's like very kind of elegant and big in Charulata, or more lowly with the Apu films, and then just kind of like modern, almost everyday kind of people with a celebrity thrown in there in the hero. Even those show a range, and then Alex has kind of brought up even more of his films that kind of diverge to various elements. So it's not like he was stuck to the father works too hard kind of storyline. Like he was all over the place.
No, it's and again, this isn't to bash Bollywood or anything. Regardless of whether or not you enjoy it, they are really fun movies, but also only blockbusters can only give you like a very removed idea of a country or a culture's values or impressionistics, which isn't to say like that's the only reason that a movie should exist. Like there is a very valid reason that Bollywood movies exist and are enjoyed by so many people. It's just that we don't see like hardly any of the other kind coming out of India. So it's just so nice to watch some of that.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Alex. Well, speaking of big and entertaining films, what are we talking about next time?
Well, next time on the podcast, Jonathan, we're going to be talking about heist movies. So go ahead and get your synchronized watches ready, everybody. Because first up, we're going to be talking about Rififi from 1955, which is a French heist movie. Then,
one of the first, I believe, that kind of kicked off the popularity. We've already talked about Asphalt Jungle.
But this is one of the first ones that really set out to be a heist movie, not just a crime movie. So then we're going to talk about Ocean's 11 from 1960s, the Rat Pack version. And then, of course, Jonathan had to slip some Nolan in here, so we're going to be talking about Inception from 2010, which I'm really surprised we haven't talked about on the podcast before. Have we not talked about Inception?
No, I think we've kind of danced around it with like the Nolan episode, and then I think we did Memento for like revenge movies and stuff like that, but Inception hasn't made it, and I think it fits when we were talking about Asphalt Jungle, and we kind of were like, this is heist films kind of became a genre after this. I started thinking about it, and I was like, that would be a good episode, and I think Inception kind of is almost like an anti-heist film because they're trying to return something rather than steal it, so I think it would be an interesting element to the conversation.
It will definitely make for an interesting conversation with some more movies that are more likely for you all to have seen than a bunch of relatively obscure from the mainline films from India. But yes, Rififi might be a little weird. It's also one that's a little hard to find, but it's not impossible. It's out there. Ocean's 11 from 1960 should be fairly readily available, and I would be shocked if most of you don't have or know somebody who has a like Blu-ray copy of Inception already. Yeah, right.
And I'm sure we'll kind of roll in a conversation of the modern Ocean's trilogy into the Ocean's 11. So many people should be familiar with that one at the very least. But yeah, if you would like to support the film, if you like what we're talking about, you like the weird range from Indian films to American blockbuster heist films from the 60s to the 2010s, then head over to Patreon, because we would appreciate your support, and you can join our digital community where we live stream our episodes every other week, and we also sometimes do Netflix parties and that kind of thing, just talk about film. We also have a bonus podcast if you would like to hear more from us on the weeks that we don't release the main episodes. And the last bonus episode was a film from 100 years ago by D.W. Griffith called Way Down East, which took both of us by surprise. So you'll want to head over there and hear our thoughts on that film.
Yeah. Go ahead and check it out. But for now, that is all the time we have for this episode.
If you have movie suggestions for us or just want to reach out, I can be found on Twitter at @JSSatchel.
And I'm at Alex Geringer.
And I'm at the Blue Jay, 1994.
And to find links to things that we talked about today, you can view them on the blog at thefilmlings.com.
If you like the show, let us know. Leave us a review on iTunes so other people will know what we're all about.
We definitely appreciate it.
Talk to you next time.
All right, see ya. If you want to know, Satyajit Ray was 6'4" tall.
That's pretty tall.
That is actually. I just am amazed that why does Wikipedia have that on there? Like, it's so specific.
Dude, Indian cinephiles are intense.
That's true.
They do not mess around. They'll tell you like the like biostats of their favorite people. Like it's intense.
Attack.
This is my favorite star, and this is how tall they are, and this is their resting heart rate.
Attack scored 3.
This is their attack power. This is their class. This is their type advantages.
Oh gosh.